According to relationship research expert John Gottman, the 4 horsemen that predict a failed relationship are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. I want to stop on these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and look at them through this trauma lens from the IFS Internal Family Systems perspective, because it makes a lot of sense why these would lead to a complete rupture in the relationship. So let's go with the first, this criticism. Criticism is a normal part of any relationship, but if there is too much of it, and if the people involved in it have been traumatized by criticism, for example, growing up with a critical parent, being constantly under that kind of negative outpouring, they usually form a certain opinion about themselves. It's not a pretty one. It's I'm bad, something is wrong with me. So in a system, what happens, this part, like I'm bad, something is wrong with me, I'm defect, is pushed away from the consciousness because it is an absolutely necessary thing in order to be able to survive and to thrive and to pursue life. So when a spouse criticizes the other, that really can be triggering for that exiled pain and view of themselves. So it's very normal for there to be the following response, which is defensiveness. It's almost like a natural response to this other person. However, it doesn't really help the relationship overall, because what it does, it turns off the empathy response in the person. So they can't hear the other's complaint and what they really need and their desire behind that complaint. So first, let me give you in a nugget the neurobiology behind these romantic relationships. And I'm very grateful for that to Andrew Huberman from the Huberman Lab podcast. He's a neuroscientist and a professor at Stanford University. So grateful that he's put this out there. The detail in which he goes, I find it priceless, and it's really super fascinating to me. All the research in neurobiology so far, what has shown that when it comes to love and attachment and desire, all these that are involved in this romantic and the formation and sustainability of romantic relationships, there are 3 neurocircuits involved in it: the autonomic nervous system, the empathy response, and what is called the positive delusion. This last one is so interesting because it sounds like it shouldn't be taken seriously, because it's basically a way to, when you regard the other person as different, as special from the rest, and it's actually critical for the stability of a long-term relationship, it turns out. And this one I found it particularly interesting because it involves a part of a brain called the insular cortex. And what this part of the brain does is really intercept the internal state, your internal state, and then link it to the outside and extercept the state of the other person. So it's linking your internal experience to somebody else's outside. And it's the mechanism of how this one other person only makes you feel a particular way, makes you feel so wonderful. And a way of collecting this information is really based a lot on the cues that the other person gives, how much you can gather that they feel the same way as you feel. So it's this attunement happens. This makes a lot of sense why this is important for a long-term relationship, for the stability of a long-term relationship, because this allows you to assign certain value to a particular person in your life. And if you're able to maintain that, then the kind of feelings that person generates in you, they are going to last. So the other person sort of has access to your control panel when it comes to how you feel. When there is constant defensiveness and the other person doesn't feel heard and seen and understood, or there is no attempt to understand them or see them, biologically what happens is a turn off of the empathy neural circuits. It's only natural for this resentment to build up in the other person, and eventually leading to more criticism and this avalanche of back and forth defensiveness, criticism, which builds up to a point where there is a natural response of contempt towards the other person. John Gottman states that when contempt is present, there is a sure 94% chances that this will lead to a complete marital breakup. Why is contempt so? All these, the defensiveness and the stonewalling are protective responses from your protectors, if we, again, speaking in IFS terms, that are there to hide and protect that vulnerable spot that feels the pain of this interaction, that feels the pain of the disconnect, pain of not being seen, of not being heard, which often would translate to I'm not loved, I'm not worthy. And the contempt is one of the most poisonous one because of how detrimental it is. If we were to look at the definition of contempt, it's disregarding someone and looking at them as worthless and deserving scorn. Talk about exiles. One of the most painful and deep-seated exile that nobody likes to talk about is that sense of worthlessness and the shame that comes with it. Because if I'm worthless, then I'm not gonna be loved. That shame of being of so little value. So this response of contempt, it makes sense why it is so destructive to a relationship. When a person that doesn't have an exile of worthlessness, or let's say grew up in a healthy family environment with loving parents and healthy attachments, even such a person, when in a relationship where for a prolonged period of time it's treated with this attitude of disregard, eventually this person will develop parts that start to carry the pain of feeling so disregarded, of feeling so little, and start to take upon these beliefs that I'm not worth much. So these would be called new exiles, parts that don't necessarily stem from childhood, but that are formed now in this new relationship. And before moving to another relationship, some healing would need to take place because of the traumatic response this situation can cause in a person. According to Andrew Huberman, with contempt, there is a complete decoupling from this neural circuit, the empathy neural circuit, and the autonomous nervous system. So when that happens, then you're not perceiving that person in that way anymore, and that person doesn't carry the same value for you anymore. I hope that you find this piece interesting. I found it absolutely fascinating again, and really useful to understand what is happening and how this is happening. So because of how it heightens your biological response, all the stress that it causes to your body, it's normal that it will lead to some sort of like, let's escape, let's get away. So it leads to the stonewalling. Stonewalling is another step in the emotional cutoff, which is just like almost like small steps towards like a complete cutoff and disconnect from the other, which is it's very natural for what is to follow, which is a complete breakup, really. In the words of Andrew Huberman, with stonewalling, it's the process of untethering your insular cortex response from the other person and focusing it on your own internal state or the state of a completely other person, which basically is the mechanism for infidelity. So going back to the internal family systems, the internal family systems from the inside out approach developed mostly by Toni Herbine Blank. She came up with this process of slowing down this couple's interactions and tracking what's happening there, which parts are communicating at what point and what other parts are triggered. So then when that happens and the other person is able to hear the exiled pain, what's beneath that, and then there is a process of working individually for a time being with everyone to connect themselves from the core self to these parts that carry the pain and are feeling maybe worthless and are exiled usually. And this process allows for the healing of these parts. So then when the couples come back together, there is more freedom within the system of each partner to be able to listen to the other without this defensiveness or stonewalling coming in and cutting the connection. And from there, they are able to build their relationship almost like all over again and create these connections. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope to see you in the next video. You take care and keep the hope alive.